For thousands of years, the question haunted archaeologists, historians, and geneticists alike. Where did the people of the Indian subcontinent actually come from? India has 1.4 billion people. It contains more linguistic diversity than all of Europe combined. It has civilizations that collapsed and disappeared before Rome was even a thought. It has sacred texts older than any surviving written record from Mesopotamia or Egypt. And for decades, scientists thought they understood the basic story. They were wrong. In 2023, a joint research team from the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology in Hyderabad, Harvard Medical School, and the National Institute of Biomedical Genomics collected DNA samples from over 2,800 individuals, representing 268 distinct Indian populations. They sequenced millions of genetic markers. They built the most comprehensive genetic map of South Asian diversity ever created. Then they compared that data to ancient DNA from every major civilization on Earth. Egyptian mummies, Mesopotamian remains, Indus Valley skeletons, steppe burial sites, European Neolithic farmers, East Asian Bronze Age populations. Every single one. And when the results came back, the lead researcher later admitted he stared at the screen for 20 minutes before he believed what he was seeing. Only one ancient civilization matched, and it was not the one anyone expected. If this is your kind of content, subscribe right now. Every week I break down the genetic discoveries that are rewriting human history. Now let me show you what the data actually revealed. To understand why this discovery was so explosive, you need to understand what scientists thought they knew going in. The standard model of Indian population history looked like this. Modern Indians descended from three major ancestral groups. First, ancient ancestral South Indians, hunter-gatherers who had lived on the subcontinent for tens of thousands of years. Second, ancient ancestral North Indians, a group related to Iranian farmers who brought agriculture into the subcontinent around 7,000 years ago. Third, steppe pastoralists from Central Asia who migrated into India around 3,500 to 4,000 years ago and dramatically reshaped the northern population. This three-ancestry model was considered settled science by 2019. It explained the genetic gradient that runs from north to south across India. Northern populations showed more steppe and Iranian farmer ancestry. Southern populations showed more of the ancient indigenous hunter-gatherer lineage. Neat, clean, finished. Except the data from the 2023 study broke that model apart. Because when researchers compared Indian genetic profiles to ancient civilizations, they were not just looking for ancestry percentages, they were looking for something more specific. They were looking for directional gene flow, not just who mixed with whom, but who came from where, and when. The results created a completely different picture. The research team started with Egypt. Ancient Egyptian DNA, extracted from mummies dating between 1,400 and 400 BCE, showed haplogroups dominated by Middle Eastern and North African lineages. Haplogroup J and E were common. These showed minimal overlap with Indian populations. The genetic distance was too large for any direct ancestral connection. Next came Mesopotamia. Sumerian and Babylonian remains from sites in modern Iraq showed haplogroup profiles dominated by J2 and G lineages, familiar in West Asia. But when compared to Indian genetic data, the overlap was marginal. Trade connections existed, gene flow, minimal. Then came the surprise candidate, the Indus Valley civilization. This should have been the obvious match. The Indus Valley civilization, also called the Harappan civilization, flourished in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, from roughly 3,300 to 1,300 BCE. Cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa had populations in the tens of thousands, advanced drainage systems, standardized weights and measures, a writing system that has never been decoded. If any ancient civilization was going to match modern Indians, it should have been Harappa. The results were complicated. Ancient Harappan DNA showed strong connections to Iranian farmer ancestry, with a significant component of the ancient South Asian hunter-gatherer lineage. But here is the critical finding. Modern Indians from nearly every region showed only partial overlap with Harappan remains. Something major had happened between the Harappan period and the present. The Harappans did contribute to the modern Indian gene pool, but they were not the dominant source. And they were definitely not the civilization that matched most strongly. The steppe civilizations of Central Asia came next. Yamna and Sintashta remains from burial mounds across Kazakhstan and Russia showed haplogroup R1a at very high frequencies. This haplogroup shows up clearly in modern North Indian populations, particularly among upper caste communities in the Gangetic Plain. This was not new information. The steppe ancestry component in North Indians was already established, but the research team was not looking for the largest ancestry component. They were looking for the civilization that matched most completely across the widest range of Indian populations. And the steppe match only worked for northern India. When researchers applied the same analysis to South Indian populations, particularly to communities in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh, the steppe signal disappeared almost entirely. South Indians showed less than 3% steppe ancestry in most samples, so the steppe civilization did not match India as a whole. The team still had one more comparison to run. They turned to the ancient populations of South and Southwest Asia, specifically to the Zagros mountain region of what is now western Iran. The Zagros region sits at the intersection of the Iranian Plateau, Mesopotamia, and the Central Asian steppes. Archaeological evidence shows this region was one of the earliest centers of agriculture outside the Fertile Crescent. People there were farming as early as 9,000 years ago. Ancient DNA from Zagros hunter-gatherers and early farmers showed a distinctive genetic profile, heavy on haplogroup J2A, significant levels of haplogroup L, mixed with ancient South Asian markers that appeared nowhere else in the ancient world. When the research team compared this ancient Zagros genetic profile to modern Indian populations, something extraordinary happened. The match appeared across the entire subcontinent. Not just the north, not just the south, everywhere. North Indian populations showed Zagros ancestry, mixed with steppe and ancient hunter-gatherer components. South Indian populations showed Zagros ancestry mixed predominantly with the ancient South Asian hunter-gatherer component, with minimal steppe signal. Tribal populations in central India showed traces of the same Zagros lineage, mixed with the deepest, oldest layers of South Asian hunter-gatherer DNA. The common thread running through every Indian genetic profile, regardless of region, caste, language, family, or social group, was the ancient Iranian-related population from the Zagros Mountains. These were not Persians, not Mesopotamians, not any of the civilizations that dominate ancient history textbooks. These were the earliest Iranian farmers, people who lived in the mountains of what is now western Iran 9,000 years ago, and began a migration eastward that would eventually reach the shores of the Indian Ocean. Their genetic signature became the foundation layer of the Indian subcontinent. The discovery reframed everything. The question researchers immediately asked was this: how did the genetic signature of ancient Iranian mountain farmers end up as the foundational layer of a subcontinent with 1.4 billion people? The answer took years to reconstruct from the archaeological and genetic data combined. Between 7,000 and 5,000 years ago, these early Iranian farmers began moving eastward. They crossed the Iranian plateau. They moved into what is now Baluchistan and Sindh. They settled the Indus River Valley. Here is the critical point. These Iranian farmers did not arrive in an empty land. Ancient South Asian hunter-gatherers had been living on the subcontinent for at least 50,000 years, possibly longer. When the farmers arrived, they met these established populations. What followed was not conquest. The genetic evidence shows gradual mixing over centuries and millennia. The Iranian farmer populations brought agriculture, which could support higher population densities. Over time, their numbers grew relative to the hunter-gatherers. But the hunter-gatherers did not disappear. They mixed with the newcomers. contributing a substantial portion of the ancestry of what would eventually become the Indus Valley Civilization. The Indus Valley Civilization was therefore itself a genetic mixture of Iranian farmer ancestry and ancient South Asian hunter-gatherer ancestry. And when the Indus Valley Civilization later declined around 1900 BCE, its people did not vanish. Archaeological evidence shows a population shift southward and eastward. Former Harappan populations moved deeper into the subcontinent. They carried that Iranian farmer and ancient hunter-gatherer genetic mixture with them. And that is why the Zagros Iranian farmer ancestry shows up across the entire Indian subcontinent today. Even in populations with essentially zero steppe ancestry, the Iranian farmer genetic layer is present. It was there before the steppe migrations. It was there during the Harappan period, and it persisted through everything that came afterward. But the finding that generated the most controversy inside the scientific community was not the Iranian farmer connection itself. It was what that connection implied about the origins of Indian civilization. For over a century, two competing theories have dominated the debate about ancient India. The out-of-India theory argued that civilization, possibly even the Proto-Indo-European language family, originated in India and spread outward to the rest of the world. The Into India theory argued that the key populations and cultural innovations came into India from outside, first from Iranian farmers, then from Central Asian steppe peoples. The 2023 genetic data came down decisively on one side. The Zagros Iranian farmers arrived in India from the west. The steppe pastoralists arrived from the north and northwest. The foundational cultural and genetic elements of what became Indian civilization were shaped by people who came in, mixed with ancient indigenous populations, and created something entirely new. But here is the nuance that gets lost when this becomes a political debate. The ancient South Asian hunter-gatherers who mixed with the incoming Iranian farmers were themselves a deeply ancient population. Genetic modeling suggests their ancestors separated from other human populations at least 50,000 years ago, possibly earlier. They were not recent arrivals. They were arguably the most ancient population in the entire region. So modern Indians are not simply the descendants of migrants. They are the descendants of one of the oldest surviving human lineages on Earth, combined with subsequent migration waves that added Iranian farmer and Central Asian steppe ancestry on top of that ancient foundation. The ancestral South Indian component, present at high levels in Dravidian-speaking populations of South India and in many tribal communities, connects modern Indians to humans who may have been among the first people to migrate out of Africa and establish themselves in South Asia. That is the real revelation. Not that India was colonized by outsiders, but that the Indian subcontinent contains genetic layers stretching from the earliest human migrations to the dawn of civilization, and that the mixture of all those layers created one of the most genetically diverse, culturally complex, and historically layered populations anywhere on Earth. The ancient Iranian farmers from the Zagros Mountains matched modern Indian DNA most broadly because they became the bridge. They connected the deep ancient hunter-gatherer populations already in South Asia with the later waves of migration from the north and west. They were not the origin of India. They were the catalyst that transformed ancient South Asia into something that eventually became the subcontinent we know today. When researchers finally published these results, the debate did not end. It intensified. Because what you do with this information, whether you use it to understand shared human history or to make political arguments about who belongs where, is a question genetics cannot answer. The DNA shows how populations mixed and moved. It does not tell us what that should mean for how we treat each other today. But the evidence is there. Modern Indians carry genetic fingerprints from ancient Iranian mountain farmers, from Central Asian steppe pastoralists, and from hunter-gatherers who walked the South Asian landscape 50,000 years ago. Every one of those groups contributed to what exists today. That is not a story of replacement. That is a story of accumulation. And it took geneticists comparing Indian DNA to every ancient civilization on Earth to finally see it clearly.